Welcome back, my friends, to another journey into the darkest corners of the world of ice and fire. If you're new here, I'm your guide through the forbidden histories and cursed lands that maesters dare not speak of. Now close your eyes and imagine this. A Valyrian dragonrider, the greatest of her age, flying south on wings of fire and shadow. For 3 years she flies, mapping lands no human has ever seen. But on the 3rd year, something happens. Her dragon, a beast that has never known fear, suddenly refuses to go further. It roars in terror. It tries to turn back against her commands, and when she finally sees what lies ahead in the depths of that green hell, she understands. Some things are older than dragons. Some things make even dragons afraid. Imagine a city built of black stone, so ancient that it existed before the first men ever set foot in Westeros. A city with doorways too wide and too low for any human to use. A city where nothing grows, where no bird will fly, where perfect silence waits like a held breath. And in that city, armor from 1,000 expeditions stacked in careful piles, Giscari armor from 5,000 years ago, Valyrian steel from before the Doom, fresh armor from last month, all arranged in neat archaeological layers, by someone that has been collecting trophies for millennia. Imagine ships returning to port with every sailor dead at their post, not killed, just dead, eyes open, staring south. And on their lips, those who examine the bodies find salt water. But these ships never sank. These men drowned on dry decks, their lungs full of seawater that came from within. Imagine a jungle so vast. It makes the wolfswood look like a garden, so deadly that it has swallowed the armies of old Gissi, the sorcerers of Valyria, the fleets of the greatest sea lords. A jungle that doesn't just kill you, it keeps you. And sometimes, on quiet nights, sailors claim they can hear them, the lost thousands, singing, calling, begging others to join them in the green darkness. This is Sothoryos, the dark continent, the green hell, the one place in all the known world that has never been conquered, never been mapped, never been understood. Tonight, I'm going to tell you why. You see, there's a ship preparing to sail south right now. Somewhere in the free cities, a captain is loading supplies, hiring crew, promising them riches beyond measure. He's studied the old maps, he's read the warnings, and like every captain before him, he believes he'll be different. He believes he'll succeed where countless others failed. He's convinced that with the right preparation, the right weapons, the right knowledge, he can finally unlock the secrets of Sothoryos. He's wrong. And before this night is over, you'll understand why. You'll understand what Princess Nymeria's lost 300 ships really found. You'll understand why the Valyrians, at the height of their power, declared one single place unconquerable and forbade all attempts to claim it. You'll understand what Corlys Velaryon saw on his 9th voyage that made him vow never to return. You'll understand why maesters lock certain books away and refuse to let anyone read them. Because the truth about Sothoryos isn't just that it's dangerous. The truth is that we are not alone on this world. We never have been. And in the deep green south, something far older than humanity still waits in the ruins we were never meant to find. So settle in, turn down the lights, and let me take you on a journey to the one corner of the world where even dragons fear to fly. Let me show you the cursed secrets of Sothoryos, secrets that have remained hidden for 10,000 years. Until now. To understand Sothoryos, you must first understand how little we truly know about it. On every map created by the maesters of the Citadel, the continent of Westeros is rendered in exquisite detail. Every castle, every river, every road carefully marked. Essos stretches across the parchment, showing the free cities, the Dothraki Sea, even distant Yte and Ashai by the shadow. But when the cartographers reach the space south of the summer sea, their careful lines simply stop. The parchment continues, but the details do not. Instead, you find only vague coastlines, a few names scattered like warnings, and then nothing, just blank space. And sometimes, written in the old tongue, a single phrase, "Here the map ends." Not for lack of trying. Oh no, the maesters have tried. Every great civilization in history has tried. But Sothoryos has a way of swallowing knowledge as readily as it swallows men. The continent itself is massive. The maesters estimate it to be at least 3 times the size of Westeros, though none can say for certain. It lies south of Essos, across a stretch of water called the Summer Sea, though there is nothing summery about what waits on the far shore. The northern coast has been partially charted, a ragged line of bays and peninsulas jutting into the water like the teeth of some vast sleeping beast. But venture inland, past that narrow strip of mapped territory, and you enter a realm where the very laws of nature seem to operate differently. The geography that has been documented reads like a fever dream. First, there is the heat. An oppressive, suffocating heat that strikes you the moment your ship crosses into southern waters. The kind of heat that makes steel too hot to touch and causes leather to rot within days. Then comes the humidity. The air itself seems to thicken, becoming something you must push through rather than breathe. Sailors speak of feeling as though they're drowning in air, their lungs working twice as hard to draw breath. The jungle that covers the interior is unlike anything found in Westeros or the known parts of Essos. The trees grow to heights of 300 feet or more, their trunks as wide as the towers of Winterfell. Their canopy is so dense that even at noon, the forest floor exists in a perpetual green twilight. Sunlight, when it penetrates at all, takes on an eerie emerald quality, filtered through layer upon layer of leaves until it seems less like light and more like the glow of some alien sun. The coastline that has been charted bears names that hint at the horrors within. Basilisk Point, where jagged black rocks tear the hulls of ships that venture too close. Wyvern Point, where volcanic caves house nests of those vicious dragon cousins, smaller than true dragons but far more aggressive, hunting in coordinated packs with paralyzing venom in their tails. The Isle of Tears, so named for reasons that are both obvious and terrible. And the Basilisk Isles themselves, a scattered chain of islands that serve as stepping stones between Essos and the mainland, inhabited only by corsairs, pirates, and those who have nowhere else to go. On the coast itself lie the ruins of what were once ambitious colonies. Zamatar, built by the Giscari Empire at the height of their power, now nothing but crumbling stone walls being slowly consumed by the jungle. And Gogossus, the name that makes even hardened sailors draw protective symbols in the air. Once a Valyrian colony where blood mages conducted their darkest experiments, it now stands abandoned, a place so cursed that even the plants refuse to grow there. The interior, the true heart of Sothoryos, remains almost completely unknown. The maesters call it the Green Hell, and even that name feels inadequate. It is a place where expeditions venture with 100 men and return with 10, where cities of ancient black stone wait in silence, their doorways built for forms that were never human, where rivers run colors that water should not be, red and black, and shades that have no names in any tongue. Throughout history, this dark continent has been approached by the curious, the ambitious, and the greedy. Nymeria Bellaris, the legendary Valyrian dragonrider, spent 3 years flying over Sothoryos on her great dragon Terrax, mapping what she could from the sky. She penetrated further south than any before or since, and when she finally returned, she spoke of wonders and horrors that the maesters recorded dutifully but did not believe. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, made 9 separate voyages to Sothoryos, each one taking him deeper into its mysteries. The first few voyages made him wealthy beyond measure. The last few voyages took something from him that could never be replaced. After the 9th, he swore never to return, and he kept that oath until his death. And then there are the countless others, the nameless explorers, the ambitious colonists, the faithful septons who sought to bring the light of the Seven to the darkness, the soldiers sent to establish forts, the merchants seeking exotic goods, the maesters pursuing knowledge. They came in their hundreds and thousands across millennia. Most never returned at all. Those who did brought back tales that were too consistent to dismiss as mere fantasy, too strange to fully believe. And always, they brought back the same warning. Turn back. Some places are not meant for men. Some secrets should stay buried. What draws men to places that devour them? What singular force compels entire civilizations to send their sons and daughters into jungles that have already consumed thousands before them? The answer is simpler and more tragic than you might think. It is the same force that has driven humanity since we first learned to dream: gold, knowledge, glory, and the unshakable belief that we are somehow special, somehow different, somehow exempt from the fate of those who came before. The first civilization to seriously attempt the conquest of Sothoryos was Old Gez, more than 5,000 years before Aegon's conquest. At their height, the Gezkari controlled an empire that stretched from Slaver's Bay to the very edges of the known world. They had perfected the art of war, built cities that housed hundreds of thousands, and created a slave system so efficient that it would endure long after their empire fell. They looked at their achievements and saw themselves as invincible. When their scouts returned from the Basilisk Isles with tales of a vast southern continent rich with resources, the Gezkari response was predictable. They would take it. They would claim it. They would add it to their dominion as they had added every other land they encountered. The initial expeditions were cautious. They established mining operations and trading posts on the Basilisk Isles first, using slave labor to extract precious metals and rare gemstones. These early ventures proved profitable enough to fuel greater ambition. If the islands held such wealth, surely the mainland would yield even greater treasures. They sent exploration parties inland, small groups at first testing the waters. Some returned with promising reports of dense forests filled with exotic woods and strange animals. Others did not return at all, but losses were expected in any frontier expansion. Emboldened by early successes, the Gezkari Empire committed serious military force to the venture. They dispatched the Third Legion, 5,000 of their finest soldiers, veterans of countless campaigns. These were not green recruits or expendable slaves. These were professional warriors, battle-hardened and well-equipped. Their orders were straightforward: march inland, establish a permanent fortress, and secure Gezkari control over the interior. Supply trains followed them carrying provisions for 6 months. Engineers accompanied the force, ready to build the fortifications that would serve as the foundation of a new province. The Third Legion marched into the green hell with drums beating and standards flying. And then, as if the jungle itself had swallowed them whole, they simply ceased to exist. No messengers returned. No survivors straggled back to the coast. The supply trains found empty campsites with cold fire pits, but no bodies, no blood, no signs of battle. It was as if 5,000 men had walked into the green twilight and been erased from existence. The disappearance of an entire legion shocked the Gezkari High Command. They dispatched the Second Legion to investigate, to find their lost brothers, to discover what had happened. But the Second Legion refused to venture beyond a certain point. The soldiers, hardened men who had faced enemies across the known world, reported something that their officers found difficult to believe. "The trees have eyes," they said. "The jungle watches." Men who pushed forward despite these warnings died of sudden fevers within hours. Officers who attempted to force the advance found their commands ignored, their authority crumbling in the face of a fear they could not quite name. After several failed attempts to penetrate the interior, the Gezkari Empire did something unprecedented. They gave up. They abandoned their ambitions for mainland Sothoryos and satisfied themselves with the more manageable Basilisk Isles. But they did not give up completely. Over the following centuries, they continued to send expeditions, smaller ones, always hoping that the next attempt would yield different results. It never did. The artifacts these early explorers found should have warned them more clearly. Along the coast, partially buried by centuries of jungle growth, they discovered structures made of a strange black stone. The material was unlike anything in Giscari architecture, unlike anything they had ever seen. The blocks were massive, each one weighing several tons, fitted together with precision that seemed impossible without mortar. Yet no gaps existed between them, no space where even a knife blade could penetrate. The stone itself felt wrong to the touch, always slightly damp, leaving an oily residue on the skin that was difficult to wash away. More disturbing than the construction were the decorations. Carved into these ancient structures were images of beings that were not quite human. They had humanoid forms, standing upright with 2 arms and 2 legs, but the proportions were all wrong. The torsos were too wide, the limbs too short, the heads oddly shaped, and the faces, when they could be made out beneath centuries of weathering, showed features that belonged to no race known to the Giscari. Wide mouths filled with needle teeth, eyes too large and set too far apart. A squatting, amphibious quality that made viewers instinctively uncomfortable. The inscriptions accompanying these carvings were in no language the Giscari scholars could identify, not their own ancient script, not the languages of any neighboring peoples, something older, something that predated their entire civilization. They made rubbings of the texts, sent them back to their greatest linguists and historians, but no translation ever came. The writing remained as impenetrable as the jungle itself. Among the ruins, explorers found what appeared to be warnings. Though they could not read the words, the intent was clear from the context, from the placement of the carvings at entry points and thresholds. Do not pass beyond this point. Do not wake what sleeps below. The green is patient. The green is forever. These translations would come much later, after centuries of study, after countless more expeditions had vanished into that verdant darkness. But perhaps the most telling artifacts were the messages left by those few survivors who made it back to civilization. Ship captains recorded strange observations in their logs. 17 men went ashore, 3 returned. They will not speak. They only stare south. Traders wrote hurried notes before succumbing to fever. The illness took my crew one by one, but fever does not explain the singing. An explorer named Garin left a final journal entry that would be found weeks after his death. The jungle is not hostile. We are simply not supposed to be here. Something older has claim. Even then, even with these warnings written in blood and loss, the expeditions continued, because humanity has never learned the most important lesson that Sothoryos had to teach. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some territories belong to others, and some hungers, whether for gold or knowledge or glory, can never be satisfied. To step into the interior of Sothoryos is to enter a world that operates by rules fundamentally different from anything you know. The assault on your senses begins immediately. The heat wraps around you like a physical thing, thick and suffocating, making every breath an effort. Your clothes become soaked with sweat within minutes, and they never dry, just grow heavier and begin to rot against your skin. The humidity reaches levels that seem impossible. Water hangs in the air itself, turning the atmosphere into something between gas and liquid, something you must push through rather than simply breathe. Then there are the trees. They rise around you like the pillars of some vast cathedral, their trunks wider than houses, disappearing into a canopy so high above that it might as well be the sky. And perhaps it is, because the actual sky becomes invisible once you pass beneath those branches. The light that filters down takes on an otherworldly quality, green and dim, creating a perpetual twilight even at noon. Your eyes adjust, but they never quite adapt. There is always the sense that you are seeing only part of what surrounds you, that the true nature of the jungle exists just beyond your perception. The sounds are what break most men first. You might expect the roar of predators or the screams of dying animals, but the reality is far more unsettling. There is a constant cacophony of noise from creatures you never see. Insects the size of birds buzz past your head. Things slither through the underbrush, just out of sight. Splashes echo from rivers hidden by the vegetation, but worse than the noise are the pockets of absolute silence that appear without warning. You might be hacking through dense undergrowth, surrounded by the usual symphony of jungle life, when suddenly everything stops. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves, just perfect, absolute quiet. And in those moments, every explorer learns the same lesson. The silence is not peaceful. The silence means something is watching, something that makes every other living thing go still and hide. The wildlife that does reveal itself belongs in nightmares. The wyverns are perhaps the most spectacular, these smaller cousins of dragons, with their leathery wings and venomous tails. They are not the noble creatures of legend, but vicious pack hunters, with none of the intelligence that makes dragons magnificent. They nest in volcanic caves along the coast and hunt anything that moves. Their venom does not kill immediately but paralyzes, leaving victims conscious and aware as the wyverns tear them apart. More than one expedition has been reduced to screaming, immobile bodies waiting for death. The basilisks earned their name from terrified Giscari explorers who saw them and thought of the legendary monsters from their myths. These massive lizards can grow to 12 feet in length, with scales that blend perfectly into the jungle floor. You do not see them until they move, and by then it is usually too late. Their venom stops the heart within minutes, and they have the unnerving habit of following expeditions for days, picking off stragglers one by one with the patience of intelligent predators. Vampire bats with wingspans as wide as a tall man's armspan hunt in swarms of hundreds. They are drawn to campfires, attracted by the warmth, and they feed silently. More than one guard has fallen asleep at his post and been found in the morning, drained of blood but otherwise unmarked, except for a small puncture wound at the neck. The psychological impact of these deaths, of knowing that something fed on you while you slept, destroys morale faster than any battle. Perhaps strangest are the striped apes, creatures that some explorers call the painted people because of the vivid markings on their fur. They are tool users, intelligent enough to throw stones with frightening accuracy and to coordinate ambushes. Some survivors swear they have seen these apes laughing as they attack, displaying a cruel intelligence that is somehow more disturbing than simple animal aggression. Bodies recovered after ape attacks show injuries that are precise and deliberate, as if the creatures were testing different ways to harm humans rather than simply killing in defense or for food. But the wildlife, as deadly as it is, represents a known danger. You can defend against animals, no matter how large or venomous. What you cannot defend against are the things that should not be there at all. The disappearances that happen without explanation or pattern. Men who step away from camp to relieve themselves and are never seen again. Guards who stand watch and are found in the morning with their weapons still in hand, and expressions of total bewilderment frozen on their faces. Tents that are occupied when everyone goes to sleep but empty by dawn, with no footprints leading away, no signs of struggle, just absence where presence should be. And then there are the brindled men. You catch glimpses of them, if you are lucky or unlucky, depending on your perspective. Hairless humanoids with skin covered in spots and mottles of gray, green, and brown. They move through the jungle with a silence that seems impossible, appearing and disappearing like smoke. They use poisoned darts fired from blowguns, and the poison is unlike anything maesters have studied. It does not kill quickly. Instead, it induces paralysis while leaving the victim fully conscious, aware, and capable of feeling everything that happens afterward. What happens afterward is something survivors refuse to describe in detail. The question that haunts every expedition is whether the brindled men are human at all. They use tools and weapons, suggesting intelligence. They coordinate their attacks, suggesting organization. But they also move in ways that seem wrong, their joints bending at angles that should not be possible, their eyes reflecting light in the darkness like animals rather than men. Some scholars theorize they are descendants of failed colonies, humans who have adapted to the jungle over countless generations and lost their humanity in the process. Others believe they are something that was always here, something native to Sothoryos that merely resembles humanity enough to be disturbing. The ruins that expeditions discover in the interior only deepen these mysteries. Stone foundations emerge from beneath centuries of plant growth, forming geometric patterns that suggest careful urban planning. But the buildings they supported are long gone, rotted away or consumed by the jungle. What remains are fragments, hints of structures that were never designed for human habitation. Carved markers bear inscriptions in unknown scripts. Statues depict forms that could be artistic representations of gods or literal portraits of the builders themselves. If the latter, then the builders were not human. Among these ruins, expeditions make their camps, seeking whatever shelter the ancient stones can provide. And it is in these camps, surrounded by evidence of a civilization that vanished for unknown reasons, that the true horror of Sothoryos reveals itself. Because on certain nights, as the green darkness deepens and the jungle sounds reach their peak, something else can be heard. A melody faint and distant, beautiful and utterly wrong. It comes from no identifiable direction. It seems to resonate from the stones themselves, from the earth, from the very air. Those who hear it describe the experience differently, but certain elements remain consistent. The singing is not in any known language, yet it seems to carry meaning, to communicate desires and promises that bypass rational thought and speak directly to something primal. Different members of the same expedition report hearing different things. One man hears his dead mother calling him home. Another hears the voice of a lover he left behind. A third hears children laughing. But all of them agree on one aspect. The singing is irresistible. It calls to something deep within the human soul, something that wants desperately to respond, to follow, to discover the source. Most resist. They stuff cloth in their ears. They sing their own songs to drown it out. They tie themselves to trees so they cannot wander in their sleep. But some do not resist, or cannot. They rise in the night and walk into the jungle, following that beautiful, terrible melody. And they are never seen again, at least not as they were. Centuries after the Giscari Empire abandoned its ambitions in Sothoryos, a new power arose in the east. Valyria, the freehold, the greatest civilization the world had ever seen, built on blood magic, dragon fire, and an absolute certainty in their own supremacy. Where others had failed, the Valyrians believed they would succeed. They had conquered the Giscari in 5 great wars, reducing that ancient empire to smoking ruins and salted earth. They had bent entire continents to their will. Surely this southern jungle, however dangerous, would fall before their might as everything else had fallen. But the Valyrians were not fools. They understood that direct conquest of mainland Sothoryos had defeated every previous attempt. So they adopted a different strategy. They would establish a foothold on the Basilisk Isles, those scattered fragments of land between Essos and the southern continent. From this safer position, they would study the mainland, develop countermeasures to its dangers, and eventually extend their dominion over it as well. The island they chose for their primary settlement was called Gogossos. At first, Gogossos seemed to prosper. The Valyrians built a city there, not as grand as their metropolises on the mainland, but substantial nonetheless. They brought their slaves, their treasures, their knowledge, but Gogossos was never meant to be a normal colony. The Valyrians had a particular purpose in mind for this distant outpost. Far from the eyes of their own people, they would make it a place of experimentation. a place where their blood mages could pursue research too dark, too dangerous, too disturbing for the freehold itself. The experiments conducted on Gogossos represented the absolute pinnacle of Valyrian hubris. They sought to create new forms of life by mixing bloodlines in ways that nature never intended. Human and animal, blending them through sorcery and surgery until something new emerged. Most of these creations died in agony within hours or days. Some survived longer, kept in cages, studied, dissected while still living to better understand how their impossible biology functioned. The screams from the experimental chambers could be heard across the entire city, but the blood mages considered this an acceptable cost of knowledge. They also turned their attention to the diseases that plagued every expedition to Sothoryos. Rather than seeking cures, the Valyrians saw opportunity. If these illnesses were so devastatingly effective, perhaps they could be made more so. Perhaps they could be refined, controlled, turned into weapons. The blood mages collected samples of every plague and fever they could find. They exposed subjects to them, recorded the progression of symptoms, tried to isolate the principles that made them so lethal. Among the many horrors they documented, certain diseases stood out for their particular cruelty. Blood boils struck first with a fever that climbed rapidly, far faster than natural illness should progress. Within hours, the victim's skin would begin to erupt in boils filled with black, corrupted blood. When these boils burst, and they always did, the infection spread to anyone nearby. Death came within 3 to 5 days, but they were days of indescribable agony. Bronze petty began more insidiously, a fungal infection from spores that floated through the jungle air. The skin would begin to harden, taking on a bronze coloration that gave the disease its name. The infection spread slowly from the scalp downward, gradually encasing the entire body in what amounted to a calcified shell. The process took weeks, sometimes months. Victims remained conscious throughout, feeling their skin turn to something like stone, knowing that eventually the hardening would reach their lungs and suffocate them while they were still aware and thinking. Sweet rot earned its name from the sickly sweet smell that accompanied the condition. The flesh would literally begin to rot while the victim still lived, liquefying from the inside out. Flies were drawn to the scent, laying eggs in the corrupted tissue. Maggots would infest the living body, and there was nothing to be done. The rot could not be stopped, could not be cut away, because it spread faster than any blade could follow. Victims often begged for death long before it came. Brown leg affected the extremities first, causing them to wither and die while still attached to the living body. The limbs would turn brown, then black, then simply fall off. Unlike other infections, this did not kill quickly. A person could survive for years as a living torso, losing first their feet, then legs, then hands and arms, until nothing remained but a head and body kept alive by horrified caregivers who could do nothing but watch the progression. But the disease that would ultimately destroy Gogossos was one the Valyrians did not merely study but improved. The natural hemorrhagic fever they found in Sothoryos was deadly enough, causing blood vessels to rupture throughout the body until victims bled from every orifice. The blood mages were not satisfied with this. They wanted to make it more contagious, faster acting, more universally lethal. Through their dark arts, they succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. They created what would come to be known as the Red Death. The Red Death did not simply kill. It killed with a speed and efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. A single infected person could spread the disease to everyone they encountered within hours. The incubation period was measured in minutes rather than days. Victims would seem healthy one moment and be hemorrhaging from their eyes and nose the next. Within 24 hours of infection, death was virtually certain. The body would be found in a pool of its own blood, organs liquefied, a horror that traumatized even hardened soldiers. The origin of the plague that destroyed Gogossos remains debated. The official Valyrian records, what few survived, claim it was an accidental release from the containment chambers where diseases were studied. One broken flask, one careless researcher, and the Red Death was loose in the city. But there are other theories, whispered among scholars who have studied the fragments of evidence. What if the release was not accidental? What if something or someone deliberately unleashed the plague? What if it was a response, a retaliation from whatever force protects Sothoryos, striking back at those who dared to weaponize its natural defenses? Whatever the truth, the result was catastrophic. The Red Death swept through Gogossos like wildfire through dry grass. 20,000 people lived in the city. Within 3 days, virtually all of them were dead. The blood mages tried desperately to contain it, using every spell and incantation they knew, but their magic, which had seemed so powerful, so capable of bending reality itself, failed completely. More than failed. It seemed to make the plague stronger, more virulent, as if the disease fed on their sorcery. In desperation, the Valyrians sent dragons to burn the infected. Surely dragonfire, which could melt stone and boil rivers, could cleanse the plague. But the dragons refused to land. They circled overhead, roaring in distress, and would not descend no matter how their riders commanded. Even these creatures, bonded to the Valyrians through blood magic and ancient pacts, would not touch Gogossos. They sensed something their human masters could not, or would not acknowledge. This was not a place for them. This was not a battle they could win. A fleet was dispatched from Valyria to assess the disaster and, if possible, reclaim the colony. The ships approached cautiously, anchoring well offshore. Scouts sent to the docks returned ashen-faced. The city was silent. No movement could be seen. Bodies lay in the streets where they had fallen, piled in doorways, slumped against walls. The scouts did not dare go further. Even from the harbor, they could see enough to know that Gogossos was lost. The few who had escaped the initial outbreak, fleeing by ship before the full horror became apparent, brought stories back to the freehold. They spoke of a singing that had started the night before the plague began, a beautiful melody rising from the jungle on the mainland, clearly audible across miles of water. Some of the Gogossos residents had heard it and jumped from the city walls, swimming towards Sothoryos as if called by invisible chains. Others had described feeling watched, sensing hostile intelligence, focusing its attention on their city with murderous intent. And there were reports, unconfirmed but consistent, of figures seen moving through the ruins at twilight. Robed beings with heads that were the wrong shape, performing rituals around pools of water, chanting in voices too deep to be human. Valyria made a decision that was unprecedented in their history. They declared Gogossos quarantined, not to be reclaimed, not to be cleansed and rebuilt, simply abandoned. They forbade any ship from landing there, any person from approaching its shores. Records of the experiments conducted there were sealed away in vaults, accessible only to the highest-ranking blood mages. And they officially declared that Sothoryos itself was not worth the cost of conquest. No further major expeditions would be mounted. The resources would be better spent elsewhere, on territories that actually wanted to be ruled. This was the freehold of Valyria, the civilization that had conquered half the known world, admitting defeat, not to any human army, not to any rival sorcerers, but to a jungle and whatever ancient power protected it. Gogossos stands today, more than 1,000 years after its fall, still uninhabited. The jungle has not reclaimed it. Plants will not grow on that cursed island. Animals will not nest there. It remains exactly as it was on the day the last person died, a monument to the folly of believing that any magic, however powerful, can overcome forces that predate human civilization itself. The question that haunts scholars is why the diseases proved so resistant to Valyrian magic. These were sorcerers who could reshape flesh, extend life, bind dragons to human will. Yet when confronted with the plagues of Sothoryos, their power meant nothing. Some maesters theorize that the diseases are not entirely natural, that they contain their own form of magic, older and more primal than anything the Valyrians commanded. Others suggest that Sothoryos itself is protected by wards or spells laid down in an age before human record, defenses that react to intrusion with escalating force. And a very few, whisper a more disturbing possibility. What if the diseases are intelligent, not in the way humans are intelligent, but in the way an immune system is intelligent, recognizing threats and responding with precise countermeasures? What if Sothoryos is not just a place but a living entity, and the plagues are how it fights infection? If that is true, then humanity is not exploring an unknown continent. We are invading the body of something vast and ancient, and it is defending itself the only way it knows how. Deep in the interior of Sothoryos, weeks of travel up the Sothoryos River, which runs the color of blood through the jungle, there stands a city that should not exist, Yin. Even the name feels wrong in the mouth, a sound that belongs to no human language. The city covers an area larger than King's Landing, its structures rising from the jungle floor in defiance of time and nature. But there is not a single living soul within its walls. There has not been for thousands of years, perhaps longer. The first thing that strikes you about Yin is the silence. In a jungle that pulses with constant sound, where life screams and buzzes and rustles every moment of every day, Yin exists in perfect quiet. Birds will not fly over its buildings. Insects will not enter its streets. Even the plants which consume everything else in Sothoryos refuse to grow upon its stones. The jungle presses right up to the city limits, a wall of green life, and then simply stops. The boundary is so precise, it looks deliberate, as if the vegetation knows better than to trespass. The city is built entirely of a material that appears nowhere else in Sothoryos: black stone. Not the regular black stone that humans use for construction, but something different, something other. The surface is always slightly damp to the touch, regardless of weather or season. It leaves an oily residue on the skin that is difficult to wash away and seems to linger for days. The stone itself seems to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating pockets of deeper shadow even in direct sunlight. Those who spend too long in Yin report feeling cold, despite the oppressive jungle heat that surrounds the city. The stone radiates a chill that seeps into your bones. The construction defies explanation. Individual blocks weigh several tons at minimum, with some of the larger structures built from stones that must weigh 20 tons or more. They are fitted together with such precision that no mortar was needed. You cannot slide a knife blade between them. You cannot even see the seams unless you run your fingers along the wall and feel the almost imperceptible ridges where one block meets another. No civilization known to the maesters has demonstrated this level of engineering skill. The Valyrians at their height might have accomplished it through blood magic, but Yin predates Valyria by thousands of years. The first men were still living in caves when these walls were raised. More disturbing than the construction is the architecture itself. The doorways are wrong. They are approximately 12 feet wide, but only 5 feet tall. A grown man would have to crawl through them on hands and knees, yet they are clearly the main entrances to major structures. They are framed with care, decorated with carvings, given positions of prominence. These are not service entrances or drainage ports. They are doors meant for regular use by whatever built this city, which means the builders moved differently than humans do. Perhaps they walked on all fours, or crawled, or slithered. The thought is not comforting. The windows follow the same unsettling pattern, wide and low, as if designed for beings that hug the ground. Inside the structures, the rooms are octagonal more often than square or rectangular. Human architecture tends toward right angles because they are easier to build and more efficient for our purposes. But throughout Yin, 8-sided chambers predominate. The ceilings vary wildly in height, with no apparent logic. One corridor might have a ceiling 3 feet high, forcing any human to crawl, while the next opens into a vast chamber with a roof 30 feet overhead. The effect is deeply disorienting, a constant reminder that this place was never meant for creatures like us. Water channels run through every building, carved directly into the floors. They do not connect to any obvious source or drainage system. They simply exist, dry now but clearly designed to carry water throughout the city. In some structures, entire rooms are dominated by pools, the floors carved into bowl shapes and polished smooth. In one central building, what might have been a throne room or place of assembly, there is a massive seat submerged in a pool of brackish water that still, somehow, remains filled despite having no connection to any river or aquifer. Whoever or whatever ruled from that throne sat in water, needed water, was perhaps as comfortable in water as on land. The decorations that cover nearly every surface tell a story that no scholar wants to believe. Carved in bas-relief across the walls are images of beings that are fundamentally not human. They have the basic shape of humanoids, standing upright with 2 arms and 2 legs. But everything else is wrong. The torsos are too wide and squat. The limbs are too short and thick. The heads are broad and flat with mouths that extend too far back along the skull. And the eyes, those terrible carved eyes, are huge and bulging, set on the sides of the head like a fish or amphibian rather than facing forward like a predator or human. These beings are shown engaged in various activities, building cities, including Yin itself in what amounts to a construction record carved in stone, emerging from the ocean in what might be a creation myth or historical record of migration, worshipping something in deep water, gathered around pools or standing in rivers, their arms raised in supplication to whatever dwells below. And most disturbing, the carvings show them with smaller humanoid figures that could only be humans. The relationship depicted is not pleasant. In some images, the humans are clearly subservient, perhaps enslaved. In others they are offerings laid out on altars, while the toad-like beings perform what can only be rituals. The greatest mystery is when these carvings were made. The astronomical charts included in some of the friezes show star positions that do not match current observations. Either they were carved from a perspective far south of Yin's actual location, or they were made when the stars themselves were in different positions. The latter possibility suggests an age that makes the mind reel, 10,000 years, 20,000, more. The maesters have no tools to measure such spans, no way to date stone that shows no weathering, despite clearly being ancient beyond reckoning. Multiple attempts have been made throughout history to resettle Yin, to reclaim this ready-made city and turn it to human purposes. Every single attempt has ended in disaster. The Ghusqari tried first, sending 1,000 colonists to occupy the empty buildings. They lasted 6 months. When the next expedition arrived, they found the city exactly as it had been left, empty and silent. Dinner still on tables, beds still made, tools still lying where they had been set down, but no people, no bodies, no signs of violence or struggle, just absence where life should have been. The Ghusqari tried again 500 years later, determined to understand what had gone wrong. This time they sent 500 soldiers, professional fighters, who were ordered to maintain constant vigilance and report any unusual occurrences. The reports came regularly for 3 months, noting nothing more threatening than the oppressive silence and the way the stones seemed to watch them. Then the reports stopped. A rescue party found the soldiers' armor and weapons stacked in a neat pyramid in the city center. Every piece accounted for, arranged with care, but no bodies, no blood, no indication of what had happened to the men inside that armor. The Valyrians, arrogant, even after their failure at Gagousos, believed their blood magic could cleanse whatever curse afflicted Yin. They sent 100 blood mages accompanied by dragons to burn away any taint and consecrate the city for human use. The dragons refused to approach. They circled overhead, roaring in distress, and would not land no matter how their riders commanded. The blood mages proceeded anyway, performing their rituals, invoking their power. They lasted 3 weeks. Their final report, recovered later by a very cautious retrieval team, consisted of 2 words repeated over and over. The stones remember. The stones remember. The stones remember. The final recorded attempt to settle Yin came roughly 1,000 years ago. 50 heavily armed soldiers were sent to investigate all the previous failures and determine once and for all what was happening in the city. They were ordered to retreat at the first sign of danger and to maintain daily contact with a ship waiting downriver. For a week the reports were routine. On the 8th day the message changed. "We hear singing from below." On the 9th day there was no message. The retrieval team found the soldiers 1 week later. Their armor and weapons had been arranged in perfect concentric circles in one of the octagonal chambers, a pattern of geometric precision that suggested intelligence and purpose. The care taken in arranging them was almost reverent, as if whoever or whatever did this was creating art or performing ritual. The question that haunts every scholar who studies Yin is simple but terrible. Who built it? The carvings suggest the answer. But the answer is impossible to accept. If beings that were not human built cities 10,000 years ago or more, if they possessed engineering skills that surpass our own, if they created a civilization that spanned great distances, then what happened to them? Where did they go? And perhaps most frightening of all, what if they did not go anywhere? What if they are still here, just not visible, not accessible, not present in the spaces humans can perceive? What if Yin is not abandoned but occupied, and we simply cannot see the occupants because they exist in ways we do not understand? The same black stone that forms Yin appears in scattered locations around the world. In Asai, by the shadow at the far eastern edge of the known world. In the foundation of the High Tower in Old Town. On Battle Isle, where the citadel now stands, at the 5 forts in Yi Tir, massive fortifications that face not human enemies but the grey waste beyond, at the Toadstone in Planky Town, in Dawn. Every location now considered strange, cursed, or touched by ancient power. Every location predating human civilization in that region. Every location displaying the same inexplicable engineering, the same wrong proportions, the same sense of having been built by hands that were not human. If there was indeed a global civilization of these toad beings, these amphibious builders, then Yin represents just one city in what must have been a vast network. And if they were global, if they built on this scale across the entire world, then they were the dominant species of their age. Humanity, when we finally appeared, would have been the newcomers, the invaders, the lesser beings encroaching on territory that belonged to others. Perhaps that is why Yin cannot be resettled. Perhaps it is still claimed, still protected, still home to something that will not tolerate our presence, no matter how many thousands of years have passed since the stones were laid. History tells us that Princess Nymeria led her people from Essos to Dawn in 10,000 ships, fleeing the dragon lords of Valyria, who had destroyed the Rhoynish civilization. It is a tale of courage and survival, of a warrior queen who saved her people and founded a dynasty. But what history often neglects to mention is that Nymeria arrived in Dawn with fewer ships than she started with. 300 vessels vanished during the journey, lost to what the chronicles vaguely describe as storms near the Basilisk Isles. For 1,000 years this has been accepted as simple misfortune. Ships sink. Storms happen. The sea claims its due. But ships do not simply vanish in storms. They break apart. They leave wreckage. Survivors cling to debris and are sometimes rescued. Bodies wash ashore. There should have been evidence, some trace of 300 ships and the thousands of people aboard them. There was none. The ships simply ceased to exist, and Nymeria, for all her legendary courage, never spoke of what happened to them. She led her people forward, founded her kingdom, and took that particular secret to her grave. The truth was not discovered until recent decades, when explorers from the Summer Islands found wreckage on the northern coast of Sothoryos. Not storm wreckage, not broken timbers scattered by wind and wave. Intact ships, deliberately beached, their hulls solid and their cargo still in the holds. The ships had not sunk, they had landed, and everyone aboard had died there. The expedition that discovered these wrecks spent weeks documenting what they found, and their report makes for grim reading. The ships were in remarkable condition considering their age. The wood had rotted, certainly, weakened by 1,000 years of jungle humidity, but the basic structures remained. You could still walk the decks, still descend into the cargo holds, still see the arrangement of supplies and equipment. What you could not see were signs of violence. No scorch marks from fire, no damage from weapons, no indication that anything attacked these vessels or their crews. The ships had simply been abandoned by people who then died. The skeletons told part of the story. They were found throughout the ships, positioned as if the people had died while going about their normal duties. A skeleton at the wheel, hands still gripping the wood. Skeletons in hammocks below decks, lying in positions of rest. Skeletons gathered around what had been a table, as if they had died during a meal. The distribution suggested that death had not come suddenly, had not caused panic or flight. People had simply stopped living, and their bodies had fallen where they stood. But it was the captain's log, miraculously preserved in a sealed chest, that revealed the true horror. The early entries were routine. Storm drove us south, taking shelter in bay until weather clears. But as days passed, the entries changed. Fever has taken 3 men, strange fever, unlike anything our healers know. By day 7, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Half the crew sick. At night we hear singing from the jungle. Beautiful but wrong, makes the hair stand up. Some men wander toward it in their sleep. We have to tie them down. Day 12. Only 12 of us still healthy. The sick ones speak of spotted men in the trees, watching, always watching. We see them too now. They never come close. Just watch. Wait. The singing is louder each night. Day 15 brought the final entry, and it was incomplete. The sick ones say the spotted men talk to them in dreams. They say we have always been here. They say we will never leave. I begin to understand. I begin to... The sentence ended there, the ink trailing off as if the writer had simply stopped mid-word. Had he succumbed to fever? Had he walked into the jungle following that singing? Had he finally understood something that made continuing pointless? The mystery of what he began to understand haunts every scholar who has read this account. What knowledge comes to you in those final moments, when you realize that you are not leaving, that the jungle has claimed you, that resistance is futile? The Rhoynar were not weak people. They were survivors of a war against Valyria itself, skilled sailors and fierce warriors. If storms had driven them to Sothoryos, they should have been able to restock, make repairs, and sail away, but they did not. Something kept them there until every person was dead. Whether it was the diseases, the disappearances, the psychological assault of that relentless singing, or some combination of all three, the result was total: 300 ships, thousands of people, all claimed by Sothoryos, added to the endless tally of those who ventured south and never returned. Corlys Velaryon, the sea snake, understood the danger of Sothoryos better than most. He made 9 voyages to the southern continent over the course of his long life, and each one taught him something new about the price of curiosity. The first 3 voyages were profitable and relatively safe. He stayed on the coast, traded with the Summer Islanders who had learned through bitter experience how to interact with Sothoryos without being destroyed by it. He made a fortune in rare goods, exotic woods and strange gemstones, dyes that would never fade and spices that could not be found anywhere else. But profit alone was never enough for Corlys. He wanted to see what lay beyond the mapped coastline. He wanted to be the first to successfully penetrate the interior and return with proof of what existed there. Voyages 4 through 6 took him deeper into danger. He ventured up rivers in longboats, mapped portions of the interior that had never been accurately recorded. He lost men to the basilisks and the diseases, to the disappearances that happened without warning or explanation. Each voyage cost him more than the last, not just in lives, but in something less tangible. His journals from these expeditions show a man becoming obsessed, unable to let the mystery alone, driven by a need to understand that overshadowed common sense. The seventh voyage was the turning point. Corlys reached ruins that might have been Yin itself, though he never confirmed the location. He insisted on spending days documenting the structures, sketching the carvings, trying to decipher the meaning of what he saw. His crew begged him to leave. They felt watched. They said they heard sounds at night that were not animal sounds. But Corlys refused to retreat until he had gathered all the information he could. That night, half his crew vanished, just gone between the setting of the sun and its rising. Among them was his younger brother, who had accompanied the voyage against the advice of their family. Corlys searched for days, calling his brother's name, exploring every structure, every passage. He found nothing. Just silence and empty buildings and that persistent sense of being watched by something that would not show itself. The eighth voyage was pure desperation. Corlys returned to the same ruins, convinced that if he could just find some clue, some explanation, he could bring his brother home, or at least understand what had happened. This time he heard the singing himself. He described it in his journal as the most beautiful sound he had ever experienced, and the most terrible. It seemed to come from underground, from channels that led to deep water, from caverns that descended into darkness. And in the singing he claimed he could hear his brother's voice, calling him, welcoming him, asking him to come down into the water, into the darkness, where everything would be explained. His crew had to physically restrain him from diving into those channels. They bound him and carried him back to the ship, and he fought them every step of the way. Even after they were at sea, sailing north, he stared back at the southern horizon with a longing that frightened the men who knew him. Whatever he had heard in that singing had touched something deep within him, had promised something he desperately wanted. But he was wise enough, or perhaps coward enough, to recognize that following it meant never returning. The ninth voyage was different. Corlys went back one final time, but not to search for his brother. He went to say goodbye, to accept what he already knew in his heart. His brother was gone. Not dead perhaps, but transformed, taken, absorbed into something that was not human and could not be retrieved. Corlys ventured further south than ever before on that last journey, and what he saw there broke something in him. He never shared the full details, but fragments were recorded by the maester who attended him in his final years. There are cities still inhabited, not by men. My brother was there, but not as I knew him. They do not die. They change. The jungle does not kill you. It keeps you. When Corlys Velaryon returned from his ninth voyage, he made a vow that he kept for the rest of his long life. He would never go south again. He had learned what Sothoryos had to teach, and the lesson was simple. Some mysteries will kill you if you insist on solving them. Some questions are better left unasked. Some territories belong to others, and trespassing carries a price that no amount of wealth or knowledge can justify paying. Yet even knowing this, even having learned it through such personal anguish, Corlys could never quite let it go. Until the day he died, he would stand on the highest point of his castle and stare south at sunset, staring at the horizon, staring at the green darkness beyond. Perhaps remembering his brother, perhaps still hearing faintly the singing that had nearly claimed him, perhaps wondering what would have happened if he had been just a little less afraid, a little more willing to follow that beautiful, terrible voice down into the deep water where all secrets are eventually revealed. Of all the explorers who ventured into Sothoryos and returned to tell the tale, none penetrated as deeply as Jaminar Belleries. She was Valyrian nobility before the Doom, a dragonrider of exceptional skill bonded to a dragon named Terax. Where others traveled on foot or by ship, limited by terrain and exhaustion, Jaminara flew. For 3 years she soared over the southern continent, mapping from the air what could not be safely explored on the ground. She saw things that no human before or since has witnessed. And when she finally returned to Valyria, she wrote a report that the Dragon Lords found so disturbing they sealed it away in their deepest archives. Only fragments have survived the Doom, but those fragments are enough to shake the foundations of everything we think we know about the world. The first year of Janara's expedition was spent documenting the northern regions of Sothoryos. Flying at altitude, she could see the true scope of the jungle, a green expanse that seemed to stretch forever. She mapped the coast with precision, noting every bay and river mouth. She flew over ruins partially visible through breaks in the canopy, and saw that they were far more extensive than anyone had guessed. What appeared from the ground to be isolated structures were revealed from above to be entire cities, streets and buildings sprawling for miles, all consumed by vegetation but still present, still waiting beneath the green. During the second year, Janina flew deeper into the interior and found something that should not exist. The jungle gave way to temperate regions, forests and grasslands that looked almost normal. The climate changed despite the latitude remaining constant. She flew over valleys where the temperature was comfortable, where rivers ran clear instead of strange colors, where the oppressive humidity of the coast did not reach. This made no sense. The entire continent should have been tropical, should have maintained similar conditions throughout. But Sothoryos operated by different rules, as if the normal laws of geography and climate simply did not apply there. The third year was when everything changed. Janinara flew south, further than she had gone before, pursuing her mandate to map as much as possible. The landscape beneath her became increasingly alien. She reported mountains that seemed to shift position between flights, a claim that sounds like madness until you remember that this is a woman who had spent 2 years successfully mapping everything else. She described a desert that appeared where days before there had been jungle, and a desert should not exist at all at that latitude with that climate. Either Janinara was experiencing hallucinations brought on by prolonged isolation and exposure, or she was encountering something that operated outside normal physical reality. Then she found the chasm, a rift in the earth so vast she could not see across it, stretching for what might have been hundreds of miles. The chasm descended into blackness that even dragon sight could not penetrate, but from that darkness came sounds, not wind, not water, not the calls of animals, rhythmic sounds, regular and deliberate, like breathing, she wrote, like something vast sleeping far below. Janara flew lower, trying to examine the chasm walls, and discovered structures carved into the living rock, openings and passages leading deep into the earth, all cut with the same precision she had seen in the ruins above. Windows looked out into the chasm from depths that made her dizzy to contemplate, and in some of those windows lights glowed. Not firelight, not torchlight, but a steady bioluminescent glow that suggested either fungi or something else entirely. The lights moved. They appeared in one window, disappeared, appeared in another. They organized themselves in geometric patterns that seemed deliberate, purposeful, intelligent. Terax refused to go closer. Dragons are not creatures that know fear. They are apex predators, magical beings of fire and fury who bow to nothing. But Terax roared in distress and tried to turn north despite Janina's commands. This was unprecedented. The bond between dragon and rider is absolute. forged through blood magic and ancient pacts. Dragons may disagree with their riders, may show reluctance, but they do not disobey. Yet Terrax disobeyed. Something about that chasm, about what lay within it, triggered an instinct deeper than training or bond. An instinct that said flee, that said danger, that said this is not for us. Janara saw them then. In the moments before Terrax turned away, beings moving along the chasm walls, not climbing, she noted, but flowing, moving with a grace and ease that suggested they belonged in that vertical environment, that this was their natural habitat. She could not make out details at that distance, but the shapes were wrong for humans. Too wide, too low to the ground, even when upright. Moving in coordinated groups as if engaged in some shared purpose or ritual. The decision to turn back was not born of cowardice, but of sudden, terrible understanding. Janara realized in that moment that she was not exploring empty wilderness. She was trespassing on territory that was claimed, inhabited, protected. The ruins she had been mapping were not abandoned. They were simply the surface layer, the part that beings who lived primarily underground had left behind when they retreated from the sun. The true civilization existed below, in caverns and chasms and underwater cities, in places where humans could not easily follow. In her report, Janara wrote words that the Valyrian dragon lords did not want to hear. I saw a civilization that was ancient when Valyria was nothing, still functioning, still inhabited, still powerful enough that dragons fear it. She recommended that no further attempts be made to colonize or explore Sothoryos, not because it was impossible, but because it was wrong, because some territories belonged to others, and respecting that boundary was a matter of survival. Terrax never recovered from the journey. Dragons typically live for 200 years or more. Terrax died at 50. He remained nervous and skittish for the rest of his life, prone to waking from sleep with roars of distress. He never bonded well with another rider after Janara. It was as if something in that chasm had broken something in him, had shown him a truth that dragons were not meant to know. The beings that Janara saw from a distance, the ones she could not fully describe, might be the same entities that ground expeditions encounter as the brindled men. These spotted, hairless humanoids that appear and disappear in the jungle like ghosts. The question that has never been satisfactorily answered is what they are. Human survivors who describe seeing them up close report forms that are humanoid but wrong. The proportions do not quite match. The joints bend at angles that seem impossible. The skin is mottled with patterns of gray, green, and brown that provide perfect camouflage in the jungle environment. The eyes are large and reflect light in the darkness, suggesting adaptation for low-light conditions or possibly underwater vision. The brindled men use tools and weapons. They craft spears and blowguns. They apply poison to their darts with skill that suggests sophisticated chemical knowledge. They coordinate their attacks, using tactics that demonstrate intelligence and planning. They build structures in the trees, villages suspended in the canopy that are invisible from the ground, connected by rope bridges that they traverse with confidence. This is not animal behavior. This is civilization, albeit one very different from human civilization. But they also avoid the black stone ruins. They will not enter Yin. They will not go near the oily black structures that predate everything else. This suggests that even they, if they are indeed related to the original builders, fear or respect those places. Perhaps they are the degenerate descendants of the great civilization that built Yin, reduced through millennia to a primitive existence in the jungle. Or perhaps they are a servant race, left behind when their masters retreated underground, still guarding the territory, but no longer understanding why. The most disturbing theory is that the brindled men are what humans become after generations in Sothoryos, that the missing colonists did not die, but adapted, changed, lost their humanity over time. and merged with something native to the continent. This would explain why they are hostile to new expeditions. They remember, dimly, what they once were. They hate what arrives from the north, because it reminds them of everything they have lost. And they attack, not from mindless aggression, but from a desperate desire to prevent others from suffering the same transformation. The underwater component of the mystery adds another layer to the horror. Deviers who have explored the coastal waters around Sothoryos report structures extending beneath the waves. The same black stone cities that exist on land continue underwater, streets and buildings descending into the depths far beyond where natural light can penetrate. These are not ruins. The stones are clean of barnacles and coral, as if they are maintained, as if someone or something still cares for them. Valyrian blood mages before the Doom sent divers equipped with magical water-breathing enchantments to explore these underwater extensions. 10 divers descended, 3 returned, and they were never the same. Before madness claimed them entirely, they managed to convey fragments of what they had seen. The city goes down for miles. The buildings are still occupied. We saw things moving in the windows, lights in the depths. They saw us. They let us leave. One diver repeated over and over, "Next time they will not." The implication was clear. They had been allowed to retreat as a warning, as a demonstration of power, as a message that deeper exploration would not be tolerated. The divers also reported sounds in the deep water, the same singing that surface expeditions hear at night, but underwater it was different. Felt rather than heard, vibrations that resonated in the chest cavity and the bones. It communicated meaning without words, conveyed messages directly to some primal part of the brain that predated language. The content of those messages was always the same. Leave. This is not yours. You do not belong here. What the evidence suggests, when you assemble all the fragments and look at the pattern, is that Sothoryos is not simply a dangerous jungle. It is the last surface stronghold of something that was here before humans. A civilization that built globally, that created structures which still stand when everything humans have built has crumbled to dust. They retreated from the surface world for reasons we can only guess at. Climate change, perhaps. Conflict with emerging human civilizations, a deliberate choice to cede the surface and retreat to the deep places where they were more comfortable. But they did not abandon their territory. They simply moved it underground and underwater, to places where humans would have difficulty following, and they defend it with methods that are perfectly calibrated to repel human intrusion. Diseases that target human biology specifically, psychological warfare, in the form of singing that exploits human emotional vulnerabilities, physical removal of those who persist despite warnings. All of it suggests intelligence, purpose, and an intimate understanding of human nature. The terrifying truth is that we are not exploring Sothoryos. We are invading it. We are the aggressors, pushing into territory that belongs to another species, another civilization, beings who were building cities when our ancestors were still learning to make fire. And they are defending their home with patience and precision, eliminating threats while making sure that enough survivors escape to carry warnings north. Warnings that are inevitably ignored because humanity has never been good at learning lessons that require us to acknowledge our own insignificance. There is a room beneath the citadel in Old Town that very few people know exists. It is not marked on any map. It is not discussed in any official records. Only the Grand Maester holds the key, and that key is passed from one Grand Maester to the next, with whispered warnings about the burden of what lies below. The room is called, by those few who know of it, the Deep Library, and within that library are texts that the maesters have deemed too dangerous for general knowledge. Not dangerous because they are false, but dangerous because they are true. Among the forbidden texts are the complete records from Gargossos, detailing every experiment the Valyrian blood mages conducted before the Red Death consumed them. There are the unedited journals of Gianara Belleris, including the sections that were removed from the official report because they contradicted too many comfortable assumptions about the nature of the world. There are testimonies from the divers who explored the underwater cities, recorded before madness took their ability to speak, and there are archaeological surveys proving beyond doubt that the black stone structures predate human civilization by thousands of years at minimum. But perhaps most damning are the biological samples, bones recovered from excavations beneath Yin, carefully preserved, carefully studied, carefully hidden from anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions. The bones are humanoid in the loosest sense. They have the right number of limbs, the basic bilateral symmetry, but every proportion is wrong. The skull is too wide and flat. The eye sockets are enormous and positioned on the sides rather than the front. The jaw is too large, filled with too many teeth. The spine curves differently, suggesting a creature equally comfortable upright or on all fours. The bones are old, carbon dated to more than 15,000 years before the present. They were here long before the first men crossed to Westeros, long before the Andals sailed from Essos, long before any human civilization that we have record of existed. This is what the maesters know and choose not to share. Humanity is not the first intelligent species to inhabit this world. We are not even the second or third. We are recent arrivals in a world that was already ancient, already claimed, already shaped by beings that existed here for tens of thousands of years before we learned to make fire. The black stone cities were built by these beings, these amphibious creatures that the carvings depict with such disturbing accuracy. They were not artistic representations or mythological imagery, they were self-portraits. A species showing future generations what they looked like, what they built, what they achieved. The question that the maesters cannot answer, that haunts everyone who learns this truth, is simple. What happened to them? A civilization capable of building Yin, capable of construction that surpasses anything humanity has achieved, capable of working stone with precision we cannot replicate even with all our knowledge and tools. Where did they go? The ruins are empty. The cities are abandoned. For thousands of years, there has been no sign of active civilization in Sothoryos beyond the primitive brindled men. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Every piece of data suggests not that they died out, but that they retreated. The architecture points to beings that were equally comfortable in water and on land. The channels running through every building, the pools and submerged chambers, the proximity to rivers and coastlines, these were not creatures that needed to live on the surface. They could go below, into the deep ocean trenches where humans cannot follow, into vast underground cavern systems that honeycomb the earth beneath Sothoryos, into places where they could maintain their civilization away from the increasingly crowded and hostile surface world. Gianara Belleris saw the evidence of this during her third year of exploration. The chasm she discovered was not a natural formation, but an entrance, a gateway between the surface world and the deep realm where the Ancient Ones had retreated. The structures carved into the chasm walls, the lights moving in organized patterns, the beings she saw moving with purpose and coordination. These were not remnants of a dead civilization. This was an active, functioning society, still building, still living, still watching the surface world with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall countless times before. The diseases that plague every expedition into Sothoryos take on new meaning in this context. They are not natural evolution. They are too targeted, too effective, too specifically designed to harm humans and their animals while leaving native Sothoryos creatures unaffected. The blood mages of Gorgosos learned this when they tried to weaponize the plagues. The diseases resisted their manipulation, adapted faster than Valyrian sorcery could control, as if the plagues themselves possessed intelligence. Because perhaps they do. Perhaps they are biological weapons created millennia ago during conflicts with early human settlers. Perhaps they are maintained and refined even now by beings who understand organic chemistry and biological warfare better than our finest maesters. The singing that drives men mad and lures them into the jungle is not random animal mimicry or hallucination. It is communication from the deep dwellers, a message that human brains interpret as music because we cannot process the actual content. The message is simple and has never changed. This territory is claimed. Leave now or be claimed as well. Those who follow the singing are not being lured to their deaths. They are choosing to go, after finally understanding what the message really says. Whether they die or are transformed, or are absorbed into something else, we do not know. We only know that they do not return as they were. The connection to other mysteries becomes clear when you understand the global nature of the ancient civilization. The black stone in Ashai by the shadow, on the far eastern edge of the known world, the foundation stones of the High Tower, in Old Town, Battle Isle, where the citadel itself stands, the 5 forts in Yiti, massive fortifications facing the Grey Waste, the Toadstone in Dawn. All of these locations share the same construction, the same material, the same impossible precision. They were part of a network, a global civilization that predated human expansion by millennia. And here is the terrible irony that keeps the maesters awake at night. The citadel, the center of human learning, the repository of all knowledge, is built on the ruins of the ancient ones. Battle Isle's foundations are black stone, laid down by non-human hands for purposes we do not understand. The maesters study in libraries built atop structures they cannot explain, search for knowledge while standing on the greatest secret of all. And below them, perhaps in caverns that extend deep beneath Old Town, the ancient ones watch and wait, tolerating the pretenders above because eventually, like all human endeavors, the citadel will fall to dust, and they will still be there. The long night takes on new significance when viewed through this lens. History remembers it as the time when the White Walkers came from the north, when darkness covered the world and humanity nearly perished. But what if that was only half the story? What if the long night was a war between ancient races with humanity caught in the middle? Ice descending from the north, ancient beings rising from the south, and humans desperately fighting for survival against forces they did not understand and could not defeat. The wall was built to hold back the White Walkers, raised through magic and sacrifice and the power of the children of the forest. But what holds back the deep dwellers? What prevents them from reclaiming the surface entirely? The answer appears to be nothing except their own choice. They retreated by decision, not defeat. They chose to cede the surface to humans, to withdraw to the deep places and watch from below. And that choice was born not of weakness, but of patience. They have existed for tens of thousands of years. They can wait tens of thousands more. Human civilization is a brief flicker in the span of their existence. We will burn out eventually, through war or plague or our own destructive nature. And when we are gone, the ancient world will still be there, patient and eternal. This is why the citadel suppresses the truth. This is why the records are sealed and the evidence is hidden. Because if humanity knew that we share the world with beings older and more powerful than ourselves, beings that built greater things than we ever have, and chose to let us play at civilization on the surface they abandoned, the psychological impact would be catastrophic. Every religion would be called into question. The faith of the Seven claims the gods made the world for humanity. The old gods predate human arrival in Westeros, but even they are recent compared to the deep dwellers. Rafala the Red God, the drowned god of the Ironborn, the many-faced god of Bravos. All of these faiths assume human primacy, human significance, human destiny. All of them are wrong. Political structures would collapse as well. Kings claim legitimacy through divine right, or ancient bloodlines or conquest. But what meaning does human sovereignty have on land that belonged to others first? What right do we have to kingdoms built on ruins we did not make, to continents we did not discover but invaded? The foundations of power would crack, and chaos would follow. So the maesters keep their secrets, they maintain the comfortable lies, they let expeditions sail south, knowing they will not return because the alternative is worse. Better to lose a few hundred explorers every generation than to admit the truth and watch civilization tear itself apart. Better to call Sothoryos unmapped and dangerous than to explain that it is defended by beings who have every right to defend it. Better to forget. But forgetting does not change reality. The ancient ones are still there. In the deep trenches of the ocean, in the caverns beneath the earth, in the chasm that Nymeria found and Terax feared, they watch the surface world. They defend their territory with methods refined over millennia. They eliminate threats with efficiency that appears natural until you look at the patterns, and they wait, patient as stone, eternal as deep water, knowing that eventually, inevitably, humanity will exhaust itself, will fight one war too many, or succumb to one plague too virulent, or simply burn through all the resources that make civilization possible. And when that happens, when the fires of human ambition finally gutter out, the ancient world will still be there, unchanged, undiminished, ready to reclaim the surface they temporarily abandoned. Because this was always their world. We are just living in it for a little while. And so we return to where we began. That captain in the free cities, loading supplies onto his ship, hiring his crew, preparing for yet another expedition to Sothoryos. He believes he is different. He believes his preparation will be sufficient, his caution adequate, his determination enough to succeed where countless others failed. By now you understand what he does not. He is not different. No one is different. The jungle has seen his kind before, hundreds of times, thousands of times, across 10 millennia of human ambition. It knows how to respond. It has always known. Will he return? Perhaps. Some do. Changed, haunted, carrying nightmares that will never fade, or perhaps he will join the others. The ones whose armor gets carefully stacked in the ruins. The ones who walk into the green darkness following a song only they can hear. The ones who finally understand. In those last moments, that understanding comes too late. Either way, the outcome is already written. Sothoryos will remain unconquered. The ancient ones will remain undisturbed. And the pattern will continue, as it has continued since the first humans looked south and wondered what lay beyond the horizon. There is a lesson here, though it is one that humanity seems incapable of learning. The Summer Islanders understood it generations ago. Do not go seeking in Sothoryos. Let it come to you. Trade on the coast. Take only what the jungle offers freely. Leave offerings of respect before taking anything at all. Never venture inland. Never follow sounds in the night. Never believe you are special enough to be exempt from the rules that claimed everyone before you. It is not superstition that guides these practices. It is wisdom earned through centuries of trial and error, paid for in blood and loss, and the slow accumulation of knowledge about how to coexist with something that does not want you there. The Summer Islanders prosper where others perish because they approach Sothoryos with humility instead of conquest. They acknowledge that the continent belongs to others. They respect boundaries they do not fully understand. They accept mystery instead of demanding answers, and in return, they are tolerated. They are allowed to trade, to gather the exotic goods that make their fortunes, to interact with the edges of something vast and ancient without triggering the full force of its defenses. It is a delicate balance maintained through discipline and the willingness to walk away when curiosity tempts them deeper. Corlys Velaryon learned this lesson the hardest way possible. He lost his brother to the green darkness. He heard the singing and barely resisted its call on his 9th voyage, He saw something that convinced him, finally and completely, that some mysteries must remain unsolved. He lived decades after that final journey, long enough to become one of the most powerful men in Westeros. But until the day he died, he stared south, at sunset, always south, always wondering, always remembering. The sea may have been his domain, but Sothoryos owned a piece of his soul, and he never got it back. Rhaenyra Barristan made a different choice. She saw the truth and chose to carry it silently. She could have published her findings, could have shared everything she discovered during those 3 years in the southern skies. Instead, she let the Valyrian dragonlord seal away the parts of her report that were too disturbing. She accepted that some knowledge protects people by remaining hidden. Her dragon Terrax paid the price for what they witnessed together, dying young and afraid. But Rhaenyra kept faith with her decision. She had seen an active civilization that predated her own by thousands of years. She had looked into the chasm and understood with perfect clarity that humanity was the interloper. The guest who had overstayed their welcome, the child playing in rooms that belonged to ancient things. The maesters of the citadel carry a different kind of burden. They know the truth. They have the evidence locked away in their deepest vaults. They understand that everything they teach about human history is incomplete at best, fundamentally wrong at worst. And they choose every day to maintain that incomplete history, because the alternative would shatter the foundations of society. Is that villainy or wisdom? Are they protecting humanity from knowledge that would destroy us, or denying us the truth we deserve to know? Perhaps it is both. Perhaps there are no clear answers when the questions are this large, this old, this dangerous. What we do know, what all the evidence makes clear, is that we share this world with others. We always have. The White Walkers in the frozen north, patient behind their wall, waiting for the moment when they can march south again. The children of the forest, diminished but not gone, still remembering when the world was theirs alone, and the deep dwellers, the ancient ones who built Yin and Ashai, and the foundation stones beneath Old Town, they are still here. Still watching from their underwater cities and underground kingdoms, still defending Sothoryos with methods that seem natural until you notice the patterns. The wars that consume Westeros, the Game of Thrones that cost so many lives, the struggles for power and glory that seem so important to the people caught up in them. All of it is noise, brief and loud and ultimately meaningless against the backdrop of deep time. The Iron Throne is 300 years old. It seems ancient to those who fight for it. The ancient ones watched mountains erode and seas rise. They built cities that still stand when everything humans have constructed has long since turned to dust. To them, our entire history is a single breath, here and gone, barely worth noting. And yet, we matter. In our own context, in our own time, the lives we live and the choices we make have meaning. The captain preparing to sail south matters to his crew, to his family, to himself. His tragedy, when it comes, will be real and terrible and significant to everyone connected to him. The fact that it follows a pattern 10,000 years old does not diminish his individual story. It just places it in a larger context. We are brief candles burning in an ancient darkness, but while we burn bright. Sothoryos will still be there tomorrow, green and patient and eternal. The jungle canopy will filter sunlight into emerald twilight. The rivers will run colors that water should not be. The ruins will wait in silence, neither welcoming nor hostile, just present, and somewhere in the deep places, beneath the earth and under the waves, the ancient ones will continue their slow existence, dreaming their deep dreams, maintaining their vigil, occasionally removing new trespassers who refuse to heed 10,000 years of warnings. The singing will begin again tonight, as it does every night, rising from underground channels and ocean depths, beautiful and terrible, and impossible to ignore, calling to the part of human nature that cannot resist mystery, that must know what lies beyond the next hill, that pushes forward even when wisdom says retreat. Some will hear it and resist. They will stuff their ears and sing their own songs and survive to sail away. Others will follow. They always do. And the jungle will keep them, adding them to the collection, incorporating them into something that was old when humanity was young. This is not a story with a happy ending, because it is not a story that ends at all. It continues right now. Tomorrow, 10,000 years from now, when everything we know has been forgotten, Sothoryos remains. The ancient world remains, patient, eternal, waiting. And perhaps that is exactly how it should be. Perhaps there is comfort in knowing that no matter what humans do, no matter how we fight and struggle and try to impose our will on reality, there are forces older and larger than us. Forces that cannot be conquered or controlled or even fully understood. Forces that remind us, gently but firmly, that we are not the center of everything. That mystery and wonder and things beyond our comprehension will always exist. That the world is larger and stranger and more ancient than any map can capture. So sleep now. Sleep knowing that in the deep south, in the green darkness, ancient things still move. Sleep knowing that some secrets remain sealed. Sleep knowing that the world holds more than human ambition can ever claim. And dream, perhaps, of jungles you will never see, of cities you will never enter, of singing you will never follow. Dream safely, here in the known world, far from the southern darkness, where even dragons fear to fly. The mysteries of Sothoryos will be waiting when you wake. They have waited this long. They can wait forever.